Continuing once again in Report from Iron Mountain, we are in background information and this is video number 3. How did the group operate? I mean, where and when did you meet and so forth? We met on the average of once a month. Usually it was on weekends and usually for 2 days. We had a few longer sessions and one that lasted only 4 hours. We met all over the country, always at a different place, except for the first and last times, which were at Iron Mountain. It was like a traveling seminar, sometimes at hotels, sometimes at universities. Twice we met at summer camps, and once at a private estate in Virginia. We used a business place in Pittsburgh and another in Poughkeepsie, New York. We never met in Washington or on government property anywhere. Abel would announce the times and places 2 meetings ahead. They were never changed. We didn't divide into subcommittees or anything else that formal, but we all took individual assignments between meetings. A lot of it involved getting information from other people. Among the 15 of us, I don't think there was anybody in the academic or professional world we couldn't call on if we wanted to, and we took advantage of it. We were paid a very modest per diem. All of it was called expenses on the vouchers. We were told not to report it on our tax returns. The checks were drawn on a special account of Abel's at a New York bank. He signed them. I don't know what the study cost. So far as our time and travel were concerned, it couldn't have come to more than the low 6-figure range. But the big item must have been computer time, and I have no idea how high this ran. You say that you don't think your work was affected by professional bias. What about political and philosophical bias? Is it possible to deal with questions of war and peace without reflecting personal values? Yes, it is. I can understand your skepticism. But if you had been at any of our meetings, you would have had a very hard time figuring out who were the liberals and who were the conservatives, or who were the hawks and who were doves. There is such a thing as objectivity, and I think we had it. I don't say no one had any emotional reaction to what we were doing. We all did to some extent. As a matter of fact, 2 members had heart attacks after we were finished, and I'll be the first to admit it probably wasn't a coincidence. You said you made your own ground rules. What were these ground rules? The most important were informality and unanimity. The informality, I mean that our discussions were open-ended. We went as far afield as any one of us thought we had to. For instance, we spent a lot of time on the relationship between military recruitment policies and industrial employment. Before we were finished with it, we'd gone through the history of Western penal codes and any number of comparative psychiatric studies of draftees and volunteers. We looked over the organization of the Inca Empire. We determined the effects of automation on underdeveloped societies. It was all relevant. By unanimity, I don't mean that we kept taking votes like a jury. I mean that we stayed with every issue until we had what the Quakers call a sense of the meeting. It was time-consuming, but in the long run it saved time. Eventually we all got on the same wavelength, so to speak. Of course we had differences, and big ones, especially in the beginning. For instance, in Section 1 you might think we were merely clarifying our instructions. Not so. It took a long time before we all agreed to a strict interpretation. Rowe and Taylor deserved much or most of the credit for this. There are many things in the report that look obvious now but didn't seem so obvious then. For instance, on the relationship of war to social systems, the original premise was conventional from Clausewitz, that war was an instrument of broader political values. Abel was the only one who challenged this at first. Fox called his position perverse, yet it was Fox who furnished most of the data that led us all to agree with Abel eventually. I mention this because I think it's a good example of the way we worked, a triumph of method over cliché. I certainly don't intend to go into details about who took what side about what and when, but I will say, to give credit where due, that only Rowe, Abel, Hill, and Taylor were able to see at the beginning where our method was taking us. But you always reached agreement eventually. Yes, it's an unanimous report. I don't mean that our sessions were always harmonious. Some of them were rough. The last 6 months there was a lot of quibbling about small points. We'd been under a lot of pressure for a long time. We'd been working together too long. It was natural that we got on each other's nerves. For a while Abel and Taylor weren't speaking to each other. Miller threatened to quit, but all this passed. There were no important differences. How was the report actually written? Who did the writing? We all had a hand in the first draft. Jones and Abel put it together and then mailed it around for review before working out a final version. The only problems were the form it should take and whom we were writing it for. And of course the question of disclosure. You mentioned a peace games manual. What are peace games? I wanted to say something about that. The report barely mentions it. Peace games is a method we developed during the course of the study. It's a forecasting technique, an information system. I'm very excited about it. Even if nothing is done about our recommendations, which is conceivable, this is something that can't be ignored. It will revolutionize the study of social problems. It's a byproduct of the study. We needed a fast, dependable procedure to approximate the effects of disparate social phenomena on other social phenomena. We got it. It's in a primitive phase, but it works. And I'll stop it right there because I don't want to break in the middle of these little questions, and this next video is going to be quite short. Okay, it'll be a real quickie.